In the heart of Africa, where the sun painted golden trails across the savannah and the horizon touched the earth like a lover's kiss, there lay a village as old as the winds themselves. The people called it Zubiri, a name whispered with pride, memory, and mystery. The winds of Zubiri were not ordinary winds. They carried voices, soft and distant, like echoes from generations past. They whispered of joy and sorrow, of change and danger, and those who truly listened could feel the soul of the village rustling through the leaves. Ao, a slender young woman with eyes as sharp as an eagle's and a spirit as still as water, was one of the few born with the gift to understand these whispers. She came from a long line of wind-hearers, known respectfully among the people as whisper keepers. Her grandmother, Mama Really, was the last known whisperer before Ao, and from her, Ao had learned to listen, not just with her ears but with her heart. Every morning, she would rise before the cock crowed, sit beneath the oldest baobab tree near her father's hut and wait. The winds would come, gentle and persistent, brushing her cheeks like a mother's palm, telling her what the day held for Zubiri. Sometimes the wind spoke of harvest, other times of drought, sometimes of guests traveling from faraway lands. She would take what she heard to the elders, and they would act accordingly. The villagers trusted her. But Ao always knew that one day, the wind would bring more than news. One day, it would bring a truth heavy enough to shake the roots of Zubiri itself. She just didn't know how soon that day would come. That evening, the air in Zubiri was unusually still. The sun had just slipped behind the hills, casting long shadows that crept across the reddish soil. Ao sat beneath the ancient baobab, her legs folded beneath her, her head tilted slightly as she listened. The tree had always been her refuge, a place of calm where her gift felt strongest. On most nights, the wind came softly, bringing stories of newborn goats, river floods, or the quiet bickering of lovers. But tonight, the breeze arrived with a different kind of urgency. It whistled through the dry branches, swirling around her with invisible fingers. Her heart quickened. She closed her eyes. The whisper came low and broken, like the voice of someone trying not to weep. "Betrayal," it said, "by the hand that leads." Ao's eyes snapped open. She looked around as though expecting someone to step out of the darkness. But no one came. Just the wind, now quieter, as if it had spent all its strength to bring her that single word. Her hands trembled as she pressed them into the earth. Chief Oba, she thought. Could it be him? The same man who had raised her father, who spoke at every gathering with wisdom and patience, who led Zubiri through floods and famine. She didn't want to believe it, but the wind had never lied. Not once. Ao stood slowly, brushing the dust from her wrapper. Her breath felt heavy in her chest. She needed guidance. She needed wisdom older than her own. There was only one place to go, the hut of her grandmother, Mama Really. If anyone would know what to do when the wind brought sorrow, it was her. The moon was new, a thin sliver of silver barely visible in the night sky, casting a soft glow over the village. Ao moved quickly but carefully through the narrow paths of Zubiri. The village slept, unaware of the storm swirling in her heart. She passed by quiet huts, their fires dying out, children's laughter now memories of the day. Her feet made no sound on the dusty path, but her thoughts were loud and tangled. What if she was wrong? What if the wind had been twisted by fear or some spirit? But then what if she was right? What if Chief Oba was planning something that could destroy them all? By the time she reached her grandmother's hut, her hands were cold despite the warm air. Mama Really's hut stood apart from the others, close to the thick forest that Zubiri had protected for generations. The forest was sacred, a place of memory, spirits, and the whispers of those long gone. A soft glow flickered from within the hut. Ao called gently, "Mama," and pushed the wooden flap aside. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of herbs and smoke. Symbols of their ancestors lined the mud walls, paintings, feathers, stones carefully arranged in a circle around a pot of glowing embers. Mama really sat on a mat, her back straight despite her years, eyes closed as if she had been waiting. "You heard it too," she said, her voice calm, not surprised. Ao's lips parted. "I did, Mama." The wind said betrayal. "From the one who leads us." Mama really opened her eyes slowly. They reflected the fire's glow like pools of knowing. "Then the time has come, child. The time to decide what truth is worth, and what silence may cost." Ao sank to the mat across from her grandmother, her eyes wide, her breath uneven. "Mama, I don't know what to do," she whispered. "If I tell the village, it could destroy everything. They love him. They trust him. Chief Oba is," her voice broke. "He's not just a leader. He's like family." Mama really nodded, stirring the pot of embers with a stick carved with ancestral markings. "That is why this burden came to you, Ao. The winds do not choose lightly. They trust you because your heart is clean and your spirit does not thirst for power." She reached for a small calabash, poured a dark liquid into a clay cup, and handed it to Ao. "Drink. It will calm the fire inside you." Ao took the cup with trembling fingers and sipped. The bitter herbs spread warmth through her chest, chasing away the chill that had settled there. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. "But Mama," Ao asked, her voice low, "what if I go to Chief Oba and he denies everything? What if I'm wrong and this is just a test?" Mama really's eyes didn't waver. "Then you will know, not just from his words, but from the wind's response. You must trust your gift. And more than that, you must trust your courage." Ao stared into the flames, watching them dance like spirits with secrets to tell. The thought of confronting the chief sent waves of fear through her. Yet the thought of doing nothing, of letting the forest, their history, be sold for money, felt far worse. "Tomorrow," Ao whispered, "at first light, I will go to him. I will speak the truth." Mama really nodded. "And may the ancestors walk with you, child." Morning came softly, brushing the sky with hues of peach and gold. Zubri stirred to life. The bleating of goats, the clatter of pots, the low hum of morning greetings. But Ao's heart beat to a different rhythm. She dressed simply, tying her wrapper with deliberate care, then walked to the chief's compound. Her steps were steady, but inside her chest, her nerves were like drums in a storm. The compound stood at the highest point in the village, surrounded by clay walls adorned with carvings of Zubri's history. 2 guards stood at the entrance, spears resting across their shoulders. "I must see Chief Oba," Ao said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. The guards exchanged glances, but stepped aside. Everyone knew who Ao was, the Whisper Keeper, the one who heard what others could not. Inside the courtyard, Chief Oba sat under the shade of a wide mango tree. He was alone, sipping palm wine, his face calm and unreadable. He looked up as Ao approached, his eyes softening into a smile. "Ao," he said warmly, "to what do I owe this early visit?" Ao bowed respectfully, then raised her gaze. "I heard something last night, Chief. The wind came to me. It spoke of betrayal from the one who leads." Oba's smile faltered. The silence that followed was heavy. "You think that is me?" he asked finally. "I don't want to," Ao replied honestly. "But the wind does not lie. It brought me to you." Oba sighed and looked away, toward the hills beyond Zubri. His shoulders slumped ever so slightly. "There are things you do not understand, child," he said. "But maybe it's time you did." And with that, Oba stood up and gestured toward the shade. "Come, sit. Let me tell you the truth I have buried for too long." Ao hesitated for a moment, then followed Chief Oba to the wooden bench under the mango tree. The leaves above whispered faintly, but this time the wind offered no guidance, only silence as if waiting. Oba sat down slowly, resting his hands on his knees. He looked like a man twice his age, worn by burdens no one else could see. "It started 2 seasons ago," he began, his voice low. "When the rains failed and our crops turned to dust, I traveled to the city, searching for aid. The government offered nothing. Our neighbors had nothing to spare. And then, I met them. Foreigners. Businessmen." Ao leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "What did they want?" "The forest," Oba said simply. "They said it was valuable, rich in timber, minerals, land. They promised roads, schools, money enough to feed Zubri for years. They promised safety." His voice cracked. "But they also knew about my son, about the debt he carries. They threatened to ruin him if I didn't agree." Ao's chest tightened. She remembered Oba's son, Tund, a restless man who had once left Zubri chasing dreams in the city. Few knew what had become of him. "I didn't want to say yes," Oba continued, "but they gave me no choice. They'd bound me with silence, with shame. I thought if I kept it hidden, I could find another way. But the days kept passing and I became a prisoner of my own secret." Ao swallowed hard. The man before her wasn't the strong, unshakable leader the village knew. He was tired, cornered, afraid. She looked at him gently. "There is always a choice, Chief. You can still choose your people. Let them stand with you, not behind your back." Oba stared at her, the wind stirring at last. And slowly he nodded. The chief's nod was small, almost hesitant. But in that moment, Ao knew a door had opened. Oba stood slowly and walked to the edge of the compound, looking out at the waking village. "If I speak," he said quietly, "there will be anger, blame. They may no longer trust me." Ao joined him. "Maybe. But if you stay silent, there will be more than anger. There will be ruin. The forest is not just land to us, it is memory, spirit. If we lose it, we lose Zubri." Oba's jaw tightened. "How do I tell them, Ao? How do I admit that I, their protector, almost became the reason for their downfall?" "Tell them the truth," she said. "Let the people see your heart. They will listen if you speak with honesty." He turned to her then, really looked at her, and for a brief moment, his eyes softened with something close to gratitude. "You are your grandmother's child," he said, "brave and steady." "I am Zubri's child," Ao replied, "just like you." There was a long silence between them. Then Oba squared his shoulders. "Call the drumkeeper. By sundown, let every household gather in the square. I will speak." Ao bowed. "I will help you prepare." Word spread like fire caught in dry grass. The drumbeats echoed through the hills, signaling an emergency gathering. Villagers paused their work. Mothers hushed their children. Elders exchanged uncertain glances. What could it be? Some feared an invasion. Others feared disease. But few guessed the truth. Their machetes, not for war, but to mark the boundaries of the sacred forest, to show where Zubri began and must never end. The village scribes, often forgotten during seasons of planting, now sat in the chief's hut with scrolls and charcoal, drafting letters to conservation groups, legal advocates, and neighboring clans. Even children played their part, drawing the forest with sticks in the sand, mimicking Ao's quiet strength. Ao herself stayed near the baobab that night. She needed to listen. The wind had carried her through the storm, and now she sought its direction once again. She sat cross-legged, eyes closed, the cool breeze brushing against her skin like a gentle hand. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, "for speaking when silence could have destroyed us." The wind whirled gently, no longer burdened. It danced through her braids, rustled the trees' leaves, and brought with it the faintest hum, like a lullaby sung by the ancestors. Behind her, Mama really approached slowly, carrying a calabash of warm milk. "You have done well, my child." By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, the square was full. Faces young and old, curious and anxious, stared toward the raised platform where Oba and Ao would soon stand, one bearing confession, the other bearing truth. The village square pulsed with tension as the last rays of sunlight melted into the horizon. Fire torches were lit, their flames swaying gently with the wind. Mothers held their children close. Elders sat with arms crossed, and younger men leaned forward, whispering guesses and fears. It had been years since the village had gathered like this without a festival or ceremony. Something was wrong. Everyone could feel it. Ao stood beside Chief Oba on the wooden platform, her heart thumping like a talking drum in her chest. She could feel the wind at her back, restless and watchful. Oba stepped forward, his tall frame silhouetted against the firelight. His voice, when he spoke, was quieter than usual, but it carried across the square with the gravity of truth. "My people," he began, "I have called you here not to celebrate, but to confess." A murmur swept through the crowd. "I have led Zuberi through many trials," he continued, "but I now carry a burden too heavy to bear alone. I have made a grave mistake, one that could have cost us our sacred forest, our legacy, and our bond with the spirits of our land." Gasps rippled through the square. Oba raised a hand. "2 seasons ago, I was approached by foreign developers. They offered riches and solutions in exchange for a piece of our forest. I was desperate, afraid. My son, Tund, had fallen into trouble in the city. They used him to trap me. I did not speak of this. I thought I could protect you by keeping it hidden. But I see now, silence is not protection. It is a blade turned inward." The crowd erupted, voices shouting, hands raised in disbelief and fury. And then Ao stepped forward, her voice calm, strong, and ready to rise. "Please," Ao said, raising her arms gently, "let me speak." The crowd quieted, not instantly, but gradually, like water settling after a stone has been thrown. The villagers trusted her. Even in confusion, they were willing to hear her out. She looked across the sea of faces, farmers, hunters, midwives, teachers, children, and saw fear, anger, and heartbreak etched deep into their expressions. "I heard the truth, not from the lips of man," she began, "but from the wind that carries the soul of Zuberi. The same wind that guided our ancestors, that warned us of floods, that whispered where game could be found. It told me of a betrayal, and it brought me to our chief. I did not want to believe it, but the wind does not lie." She paused, letting her words sink in. Chief Oba made a mistake. Yes, but he did not make it out of greed. He made it out of fear, out of love for his son, and out of the belief that he had no choice. That is not an excuse, but it is a truth. And truth is where healing begins. An old woman near the front, her voice rough with age, called out, "And what now, Ao? What do we do with this pain?" "We rise together," Ao answered. "The forest is still ours. It has not yet been taken. Let this be our turning point. We will protect it, not with swords, but with unity. We will reach beyond our borders for help. There are groups, people who fight for forests who will stand with us. But we must first stand with each other." There was silence. Then, from the back of the square, someone began to clap. Slowly, others joined. The rhythm grew, not of celebration, but of strength, a heartbeat shared. The clapping built until it echoed off the trees and homes surrounding the square, a sound that grew not just in volume, but in purpose. Oba stood silently beside Ao, eyes glistening with a mixture of shame and awe. He had expected outrage, perhaps exile, but not this rising pulse of forgiveness and collective strength. One of the village hunters stepped forward, a tall man named Kibo, known for his fiery temper and unwavering loyalty to the land. "I was ready to walk away from you, Oba," he said, his voice loud but steady. "But if our Whisper Keeper stands beside you, then so will I. But this time we lead together. No more secrets." Another voice rang out. "We must act now. Protect the forest before they return to claim it." "Yes," shouted a woman near the elder's bench. "Let the forest speak for itself. Let us guard it." Ao raised her hand again, and the crowd hushed. "We will form a council," she said clearly. "Not just elders and warriors, but farmers, mothers, even the youth. Everyone must have a voice. We will reach out to the neighboring villages. We will write to the city. We will gather signatures. Let the world know that Zubri will not sell its soul." The crowd roared in agreement, the anger now transformed into motion, raw energy ready to be molded into change. Oba stepped forward once more. "I will no longer lead from the shadows," he said. "From this day, I stand with the people, guided by you, Ao, and by the wind that saved us." Ao bowed her head, humbled and steady. That night, Zubri did not sleep. Fires burned into the early hours, not in mourning, but in rebirth. A new spirit had awakened in the village. As the stars scattered across the night sky, the villagers of Zubri gathered in Spath Forward is still long. Mall circles, talking, planning, dreaming. For the first time in years, every voice mattered. Young men like Kibo sharpened, she said, handing it to Ao. "But I know," Ao replied, sipping the milk. "But I am not afraid." Mama really sat beside her. "You should be. Courage without caution can burn like fire in dry grass. But I see the wind in you now. You do not run wild, you listen." Ao smiled faintly. "I just want Zubri to breathe again." "It already is," Mama really said, her hand resting on Ao's. "Because of you." The days that followed were filled with a kind of urgency Zubri had never known. The village moved as one body, each part supporting the other. Carpenters built a small meeting pavilion near the forest's edge, a space where decisions could be made under open skies. The hunters marked safe zones with ropes and carved signs, ensuring no trees beyond those boundaries would be touched without the blessing of the council. Children were taught songs that spoke of the forest spirit, its roots, its silence, and its strength. Ao became the heart of it all. Every morning, she stood beneath the baobab listening. The winds were no longer mournful, they were eager, full of purpose. She shared their messages with the council, guiding decisions not with authority, but with wisdom. She was no longer just the whisper keeper. She was the pulse between the people and the spirit of the land. Chief Oba, true to his word, humbled himself before the council. He no longer sat above them, but among them. He worked the soil beside the farmers, helped carry lumber for the pavilion, and personally signed every letter that left the village seeking support. Slowly, the people's trust in him was repaired, not by words, but by actions. One afternoon, as Ao walked through the forest path with Mama Really, she paused beside a fallen tree. "Do you think the forest forgives?" she asked. Mama really traced her fingers over the bark. "The forest does not hold grudges. It remembers, yes, but it watches how we move forward. That is where forgiveness lives." Ao looked up at the tall trees above, their leaves whispering softly. "Then we must keep moving forward," she said, her voice steady. "One breath, one root, one step at a time." Letters began arriving weeks later, carried by traders, messengers, and sometimes strangers who had only heard stories of a brave village standing between greed and its ancestors. Some came from conservation groups offering guidance, others from neighboring chiefs pledging solidarity. A few brought promises of resources, legal advisors, mapmakers, herbalists willing to document the forest's sacred plants for preservation. Each message brought hope, and with it, a reminder that Zubri's struggle was no longer just its own. One afternoon, a woman named Amari arrived from a distant town near the coast. She was tall, with skin like polished mahogany and eyes that seemed to skin everything at once. A former lawyer turned environmental advocate, Amari had read the village's letters and traveled for days to reach them. "I want to help," she said simply to Ao, standing in the square surrounded by curious villagers. Ao studied her quietly, then smiled. "We will welcome every hand that builds and every voice that protects." With Amari's guidance, the village learned how to register their forest as sacred land under regional law. It was a long, twisting process. one that involved paperwork, signatures, maps, and endless explanation. But the people were patient. They had seen what inaction could cost. Meanwhile, the forest responded too. The rains returned, soft and steady. Fruit trees that had withered began to bloom again. The hunters swore the game was returning, cautious but curious. Even the elders who once doubted Ao's gift now sought her counsel before they made big decisions. One night, during a village circle, a young girl approached Ao shyly, tugging at her wrapper. "Can the wind teach me too?" Ao knelt, smiling. The wind teaches anyone who listens with their whole heart. And Zubri was learning to listen. The seasons shifted, and with them, so did Zubri's rhythm. What had once been a quiet village of routines became a living example of unity and purpose. The forest, no longer seen only as background or resource, had become central to their way of life. Songs were sung in its honor, and during each full moon, the villagers gathered under the baobab to offer thanks, not with grand ceremonies, but with stories and silence, letting the wind carry their gratitude. Ao remained a guiding force, but she never allowed herself to be placed above the people. She walked with them, worked with them, laughed, and sometimes wept. She refused titles and sat in every meeting as one of many. But even so, the children began to call her Voice of the Wind. It made her smile every time, not because of pride, but because it meant they understood the gift for what it was. Responsibility, not a crown. Chief Oba, too, had changed. The once proud and distant leader now spent his mornings tending to a small garden behind his hut. He called it his Garden of Return. There, he grew native herbs and flowers long forgotten by the younger generation. When asked why, he simply said, "If I can't fix the past, I can at least nourish the future." One evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and purple, Oba invited Ao to sit with him in the garden. "You know," he said softly, "I once believed leadership meant knowing all the answers. But you've shown me that true leadership means asking the right questions and listening to those who answer." Ao looked at him, her expression calm. "The wind never shouts, Chief. It only whispers. We just need to be still enough to hear." The village council continued to grow, with people from all corners of Zubri stepping forward to serve. Youth who once wandered without direction found purpose as forest stewards, guarding paths, recording plant life, and guiding visitors with pride. Women led sustainability workshops, teaching how to use the forest without harming it, crafting dyes from leaves, soaps from roots, and remedies from bark. It was no longer about survival alone, it was about balance. One day, while Ao was helping a group of children weave story mats from dry raffia, Mama really came to her, walking slowly with her staff in hand. "The wind brought something last night," she said, her voice low but serious. Ao stood immediately. "What did it say?" "It is not words this time," Mama really replied. "It is a feeling, a turning. Your time as Whisper Keeper is not ending, child, but it is changing." Ao's brow furrowed. "Changing how?" Mama really smiled gently. "You will no longer be the only voice the wind trusts." Ao understood what Mama really meant before the words were fully spoken. It wasn't a warning, it was a blessing. The wind that once whispered only to her was now ready to speak to others. That evening, she gathered a small group of children and curious teens under the baobab tree and began to teach, not just the language of the breeze, but how to truly listen. "The wind speaks in silence," she told them. "It speaks through what you feel in your chest, what you notice when everything else is still." They listened, and the wind responded. Over the weeks, more villagers began to report dreams stirred by the wind, sensations of warnings before rain, or quiet joy just before good news arrived. It wasn't magic, it was connection. Zubri was learning to be in harmony with its land, with its past, and with its spirit. One day, a boy named Obina, no more than 10, ran to Ao's hut breathless. "The wind told me the river will rise tomorrow," he said wide-eyed. The next day, the river did, and the village smiled. Zuberi's reputation began to spread beyond the borders of the region. Travelers came, not to take but to learn. Artists painted murals inspired by the forest. Writers documented Zuberi's renewal. Filmmakers asked to capture the songs and stories woven into the trees. And every time they came, the villagers welcomed them, not as guests, but as witnesses to something sacred. Amari remained for many months, helping complete the final steps in Zuberi's legal protection. One day, she stood before the village square with the official papers in her hand, stamped and signed. "The forest of Zuberi," she announced, "is now recognized as protected ancestral land. No one can take it from you. Not a chief, not a company, not even a government." Cheers erupted. Drums played deep into the night. There were tears, embraces, dances around the fire. The elders lifted their hands in thanks, and even the forest seemed to join in, the trees swaying gently in rhythm with the music. Oba stood beside Ao that night, eyes glistening. "We were almost lost," he whispered. "But the wind found us," Ao replied. The following moon marked a full year since that first whisper of betrayal. Zuberi celebrated not with feasts or fireworks, but with silence and stillness. Everyone gathered in the forest, spread out beneath the canopy, listening. No one spoke. Not a drum was struck. Instead, they sat with their backs against trees, feet in the soil, palms open to the sky. It was Ao's idea. "The wind gave us back our future," she said. "Let us give it a moment of our present." That hour became known as the listening ceremony, a new tradition where Zuberi honored the spirits not with words, but with quiet reverence. It became a sacred time, even for the restless. And always the wind came, gently at first, then boldly, rustling leaves, lifting dust, brushing cheeks with something unspoken, yet deeply understood. Afterward, the villagers rose, eyes softened by peace. Mama really passed away, quietly in her sleep that season. Her hut was left untouched, its doorway adorned with feathers and white stones, symbols of a life well lived. Ao sat outside it for hours that day, not crying, just listening. The wind had no words, it didn't need to. It wrapped around her, warm and present, a final embrace. Zuberi mourned, but they did not crumble. They sang Mama Riley's favorite songs, cooked her favorite dishes, and planted a new baobab in her honor near the forest edge. Ao spoke few words at the ceremony, only this: "She taught me to listen. Now I teach you to remember." Oba, his beard now full of gray, stood beside her, head bowed. Later that evening, he said quietly, "You've led better than I ever did." Ao shook her head. "We lead together. That is what Zuberi has become." And he smiled. Time passed, but the heart of Zuberi never changed. The village remained a beacon, rooted in its forest, guided by its wind. Ao grew older, her hair silvering, her voice deepening with wisdom. Children who once learned from her under the baobab became whispers in their own right, guiding a new generation. The forest flourished, its trees tall and proud, its animals abundant, its spirit alive. Festivals returned, but always with reverence. Outsiders visited, but none left unchanged. And whenever decisions needed to be made, the people did not rush. They listened first. The wind still carried truths. Sometimes joyful, sometimes sorrowful, but always honest. And always someone was listening. And so, in the cradle of Africa, where the horizon kisses the savanna and stories ride on every breeze, Zuberi thrived. Not because it was perfect, but because it remembered. And because a girl once chose to listen to the wind.